Hello, welcome to my webinar. I'm very excited to be here to share with you the topic of I want to start a practice next financial year. Am I crazy? My name's Sarah Bartholomeusz. I'm the principal of ULegal, and ULegal works with healthcare practices to make sure their businesses are structured properly. We translate legal and regulatory complexity into clear frameworks that help practices operate safely, reduce risk, and build long-term value. It's not just about documents, it's really about making the way that your practice is set up is going to support how you run and grow your business. I always like to start my webinars with an acknowledgement of country, and this one was created by the Year 3-4 class at my kids' school, and it's just my favourite one ever. So we play, we dance, we laugh and we cry on this earth under our feet and under the sky. This is the place, the Ghana people's land, where we live and we work and we breathe and we walk hand in hand. Thank you, we say, for sharing with us the land you're connected to and the land we all love. So one of the special things about webinars and working for an Australia-wide organisation is that we get to come in from all these different places around Australia, different traditional lands. So wherever you're coming from, acknowledge the elders past and present from where you are. Okay, you'd be disappointed if I didn't do this disclaimer, which is really this presentation is for general guidance only. Legal advice should be taken in relation to taking actions on specific issues, and we really hope you do. There's value in it for you, and today I'll explain a little bit more of why. Who am I? My name's Sarah Bartholomeusz. I'm the principal of ULegal, which I founded 12 years ago to help healthcare professionals navigate complexity and build more value in their business. And of course, today we're talking about starting a business. And the reason I'm so passionate about this area is that I really come from a very broad spectrum of health professionals in my family. So there's surgeons, there's a dentist, there's a nurse, there's a physio, all sorts of things. One of my cousin's kids has recently been registered as a psychologist. So there are, a broad spectrum of health professionals. And what I found in my discussions with them was that I felt like when I started the business that there just weren't lawyers and professionals that were really looking out for them. I think that it's really developed a lot in the last few years. There's a lot more experts around, which is very good for health professionals, but it was really an opportunity that I saw to take care of a cohort of people that I genuinely care about. So in part of that, I also wrote this book, Growing a Medical Practice from Frustration to a High Performance Business, which is available on our website. It's available on Amazon. It's also available as an audiobook. I did read it. So if you do learn better listening, or you find you have more time to listen and you have an Audible credit available, it's a good one if you're looking at starting a practice for sure. All right. Who's this webinar for? This webinar is for general practitioners, specialist doctors, and allied health professionals who are considering starting a practice. Non-practitioners or practitioners who are planning on launching a practice within the next 12 to 24 months, and also healthcare professionals who want to understand the complexity to be navigated to build a strong business in advance of starting one up. If you're thinking about starting your own practice, then that usually comes with a mix of excitement and uncertainty. Many practitioners reach a point where they do start thinking about doing things their own way, but at the same time, they're not entirely sure what's involved in actually taking that step. This is a very exciting next chapter in your career potentially, because starting a practice isn't just a business move, it's a significant career milestone. And you do have to shift from being a practitioner to being a business owner. And there is really a process involved in that. And I'll talk a bit more about that today. It's really very, very exciting being able to bring your vision to life and also to create a practice that reflects how you want to work. It also gives you the opportunity to lead the way and build something that is aligned with your own values. And I've heard that from new practice owners time and time again, that there were certain things that with the practices that they worked for weren't taken as seriously as they might like. And so having that opportunity to bring that to life is very, very satisfying for them. So alongside this opportunity, there are a number of legal and practical considerations that need to be worked through. And this is where many practitioners can feel overwhelmed, not because they're not capable, not because they don't know what they're doing, but because they don't know what's required. It's sort of, you don't know what you don't know at this stage when you're thinking about starting a practice. And the shift from being a clinician to being a practice owner really is significant in terms of how you identify yourself and what you take on in terms of responsibility. So the purpose of today is really to bring some clarity to this process of starting your own practice. And I'm hoping that by the end of watching this, you will have more confidence about whether this is the right move for you and what you need to do to consider it and feel like you're doing it properly. So starting a practice isn't just one big decision. It's really a series of smaller structured decisions that build on each other. There are 4 key stages that underpin the life cycle of any practice, and all of them become relevant. But today we're going to focus on the first stage, starting your practice and getting those foundations right. When you break it down this way, the process becomes much more manageable and far less overwhelming. What we see in practice is that when these early decisions are made properly, everything that follows becomes significantly easier. Getting the foundations right from the beginning will ultimately shape how your practice grows and operates. Let me talk you through the practice lifestyle stages so that you understand where you start and where you go from there. So what we're going to talk about today is these 3 elements: structure, setup, and succession in significant detail. But after you start, the next thing is really grow. We call it scale. And that's about getting the staffing right, getting the services right, and then expanding potentially from one site to more sites. And of course, we have clients who have 0 sites, they're telehealth only. And so that in this day and age is also an option. The third stage is strengthen. So what we find when people scale is it often happens very quickly and it's very exciting, but the business becomes a bit chaotic. And so what we like to say is the 4th stage is strengthen, where you get the chance to sort your systems, standards, and security right from a legal perspective, and you'll have a much happier team and you'll be much happier and more confident as a business owner if you do this strengthen stage. Finally, the 4th stage is sell. So we all know that we can't work forever, and it's good to have been building from the very start an asset in your practice, not just a job. So the sell stage also has 3 stages: having a strategy, and in some cases that strategy might be going back to the strengthen stage to make sure that when someone does due diligence on your business, that everything's watertight and you're confident with how it's going to show up for other people. The sale process, of course, is a big project that you'll be part of, and then settlement, that final stage where the money comes in and you potentially continue working for the practice, depending on who your buyer is, or you head off into the sunset to retire or move on to your next phase of life. All right, so that's the practice lifestyle stages. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about the start stage in more detail, because at the start stage, we're really focused on putting the right foundations in place. And this includes your structure. So how your practice is set up legally and how it will operate. The setup, which covers the practical and compliance elements you need in place before you begin seeing patients. And then succession, which is about thinking ahead, even at the beginning, and making sure there are clear plans in place if circumstances change. So for the structure, one of the first questions to consider is how your practice will be legally structured. Who owns the practice? Which entity are you going to use? So it's really about the legal and operational framework that your practice will run through. It includes selecting the appropriate entity and understanding how the practice will operate day to day. Structure impacts things like tax, risk, compliance, and how decisions are made within the practice. It also sets the foundation for how your practice will function as it grows. It's not something to leave to the last minute. The decisions that you make early on can be difficult and costly to change later. Taking the time to get the structure right from the outset will put you in a much stronger position as your practice grows and develops. This is typically where your accountant and lawyer can work together to ensure the structure aligns with your goals and how you intend to operate. When we're thinking about setup, so the second stage, we think about these three key pillars in relation to the setup of a practice: your patients, your people, and your profit. So patients. At the center of any practice is really the patients, the people that you serve, the reason that you do what you do. When you're starting out, it's not about just attracting patients. It's about how you deliver care and build trust with them from day one. Every interaction, system, and process you put in place shapes the patient experience. A key part of that is how you handle patient information. You're going to be collecting and managing highly sensitive data, so privacy and confidentiality need to be embedded into your practice from the outset. That means having clear policies around how information is collected, used, and stored, as well as processes for consent and telehealth. You also need to be prepared for things going wrong, including having a plan in place if there's a data breach. Importantly, it's not enough to simply have these documents. Your team need to understand them and apply them consistently. Getting this right early helps build patient trust and sets a strong foundation as your practice grows. The people that you engage with are the backbone of your practice. When you're starting out, one of the most important decisions is who's going to be working in your practice and how they'll be engaged. This goes beyond hiring. It's about structuring your team in a way that supports how your practice will operate day to day. You need to think about roles, responsibilities, and supervision early. A key decision, particularly in medical practices, is whether practitioners are engaged as independent practitioners or as employees. This isn't a commercial choice because it does have legal, financial, and compliance implications. There is increasing scrutiny in this area, including real payroll tax risks, if the structure doesn't reflect the reality of the working relationship. If you're engaging GPs, for example, as independent practitioners, you also need to carefully consider your service model. And in fact, that goes for all independent practitioners. It needs to be commercially appropriate, clearly documented, and aligned with how the arrangement operates in practice. Getting this right from the outset is absolutely critical. It's also important that you have clear agreements in place that accurately reflect how the relationship operates in practice. This helps protect your practice, provides clarity for your team, and sets the foundation for a strong and sustainable culture as you grow. This might sound like a straightforward question, but your premises decision has a direct impact on profitability, the third section of the setup element. Where you locate your practice will influence the patient flow, visibility, and ultimately your revenue. If you're leasing premises, the terms of that lease are critical. If you're buying premises, you also need a lease between your entity that has bought the premises and the practice, which is critical for your future planning. These agreements are often entered into early and can lock you in for a number of years, and that is the case if you've bought the property or if you're renting from a third-party landlord. Regardless of how your practice performs, you're there. If the terms aren't right, it can be difficult and costly to exit if you've got a third-party landlord, which is why it's important to have any lease properly reviewed before you sign it. You should also think about your space and how you can support additional revenue streams there. For example, a medical practice might consider a pathology arrangement or room rentals with allied health or other allied health professionals. If you are an allied health professional, can provide consistent supplementary income. And finally, consider future growth. Is the space that you've bought or renting appropriate for you to scale, bring in more practitioners, or expand services over time if the demand calls for it? Getting this right from the outset can have a significant impact on both your profitability and flexibility as your practice grows. How patients find your practice has a direct impact on your revenue from day one. For many practices, this comes down to online presence, your website, booking systems, and social media platforms that you might be using. These are often your primary drivers of patient acquisition, so getting them right early is key. However, healthcare advertising is not like other industries, and this is where risk comes in. There are strict rules around how you can promote your services, and breaches can have serious financial and reputational consequences. So while marketing supports growth, it also needs to be carefully managed to protect your practice. It's important that your website includes appropriate terms and conditions, particularly where patients are interacting with your practice online or even paying prior to seeing a practitioner. You should also have clear internal guidelines around what you can and can't publish under the practice name. This becomes especially important where multiple people or even an external marketing provider is involved. Even well-intentioned marketing can lead to issues if the rules aren't properly understood. And the last thing that we want is that you receive a letter from APRA trying to question some of your marketing. So ultimately, the responsibility will sit with you as the practice owner. Having clear frameworks, oversight, and accountability in place ensures your marketing supports sustainable growth rather than creating unnecessary risk. The third stage in the startup stage is succession, which really starts with clarity between owners. This links back to your structure as well. Be clear on who owns the practice, who makes decisions, and how that works if there are multiple owners. Put agreements in place early. They are there to protect you when things don't go to plan, even though we always say we hope that it sits in a drawer and doesn't ever have to be looked at. When it's there, it's like an insurance policy. We do often see very strong relationships at the start, but no documentation, which can create issues over time. And it reminds me of one of our early clients who is a physio, was starting a practice, and he gave her some advice about something, and she said, oh, look, I just prefer not to think about things going wrong, which is fine to have that as an approach, but we really do like to work with people who want to have things in place and manage risk in advance and really see the value in that. Because having been a lawyer that works in litigation early in my career, I know how many businesses are ruined by not having this forward-thinking approach. So being clear on accountability, including who's responsible for what and how owner practitioners are expected to be engaged. Think through real life scenarios such as parental leave, illness, stepping back, or exiting the practice. Ensure key mechanisms are covered, including decision making, profit distribution, and exit pathways. Having these conversations early and documenting them properly can avoid significant complexity later on. Why does preparation matter? Well, what we often see in practice is people rushing to open and then trying to fix things afterwards. That approach can really create unnecessary pressure, particularly in these early stages. It also introduces avoidable legal and operational risk. In many cases, fixing issues later is far more costly and stressful than taking the time to get it right from the beginning. A more structured approach upfront can save a significant amount of time and cost and complexity down the track. I thought it might be useful to talk about a real life startup specialist case where we helped two specialists start a practice together. They were specialists who met in med school and they were best friends. They were also married to two other specialist doctors, and these best friends wanted to start a practice together. The first thing that they wanted to maintain and protect was their friendship, which meant that the key risks for them was ownership versus contribution clarity that needed to be clear in terms of how they were spending their time. They needed to have clear decision making because at the time when they were starting, it was unclear. They risked disputes becoming personal because they'd known each other for so long and they knew what made each other tick, I suppose. They had no clear distinction between the practice entity services being provided in them as individuals, and that can be very complicated to understand. So when you're starting a practice, taking the time to understand how the separate legal entities protect you can be really important. So why was legal expertise needed? What value did they get from working with us? Well, it's critical not just to create documents, as I said earlier in the day, but to design a structure that actually is going to work. So the structure in this case were creating the entities that were required to protect both doctors and also their families. The setup was the fundamental documents for a smooth running of the practice, including their service agreements with their service entities to the practice, then paying a service fee to the practice for the nurses that they needed to employ, reception staff, the practice manager. Those documents were absolutely critical for the smooth running of the practice, and they continue to run the practice with those documents today. Succession, of course, the shareholders agreement was an absolutely critical piece, and they wanted the ability to add other owners if they wanted to in the future as well. So we set up the practice in that way, and they've been managing the business really well together with a great practice manager since they started up. So look, are you crazy in wanting to start a practice? There are a lot of things happening in the world. There's geopolitical issues and that might be putting you off, but it's a natural progression for many practitioners, and it does require careful planning and preparation. But with the right foundations, it's entirely achievable, and it's very, very satisfying when you get to see your vision come to life as well. The next steps, we are going to send out an email with the starting a practice checklist for you to work through. You can use that to identify any gaps in your current planning and work through the areas that need to be worked through. Some do take longer than you think. I had an email from a aspiring practice owner just this week, and she said, look, it's taking us a bit longer to work through something with the council than we expected. So there will be things that aren't don't always go exactly to plan. But once you get through to the other side of them, you'll forget how upsetting or distracting or delaying they were, I hope. In the meantime, you can begin mapping out a realistic timeline for your practice and then seeking advice early, of course, getting ahead of it, which we see so many practitioners doing, contacting our clinic or our practice for our firm for a discussion early on to know what they need to be thinking about. There's an opportunity for questions. You can book a call with me using that link, and I'd love to spend 15 minutes with you hearing about the vision that you've got for your practice. We just love talking to practitioners and hearing about their plans, particularly when they are, feel like they're really taking a risk, because that's when you need support, and that's what really motivates us to help as well. These are the steps we go through to support practices. Firstly, we align, which is taking the time to understand how your practice operates or how you want it to operate, and identifying what needs to be refined or structured in a certain way. Protecting, we really are all about protecting you as a practice owner and your business so that you can grow it to have the impact you want it to have in the world. And then finally, amplify. We help you strengthen your structure and build long-term value in the practice so that you're not just building something or not just building a job for yourself, but you're building something that has value moving into the future for you and for others. So I love this saying, we don't just prepare documents, we help you build a stronger, more valuable practice. And what could be more satisfying for a lawyer than that? Not many lawyers get to say that they get to help people who help people like we do. We've also got a Facebook group, You Legal for Doctors, which you can keep up with what we do in day to day in there. So feel free to register for that. We are always accepting new members. We do ask questions. So if you do want to join, make sure you answer the questions, or you'll just get a message from me saying, hey, you didn't answer the questions, answer them and we'll let you in. So look, I'm going to stop sharing my screen if I can work out how to. Oh, I've done it. That's amazing. And I'm going to wish you well in your planning, and I look forward to hearing from you to hear how it all goes.